I've referenced this a handful of times, the Fallout 3 making of trailer. And after the Fallout TV show, I kept getting reminded of it because there were all sorts of interviews and statements that like Todd, Emil, and the rest of the devs over at BGS made back in this little documentary they filmed that I think are very pertinent to where not just Bethesda has ended up today, but also the Fallout franchise just in general. And it's pretty cool to see the story arc. This is like the original trailer for Fallout 3, posted July 16th, 2008. And as you can see, I mean, it's like this Mr. Handy, real, like live action little trailer. Super unique, super cutesy. Don't you just love how all of these late 2000s and mid 2000s video game trailers look fan made? Because they didn't have like specific tools for capture or anything. They usually would just go in the game, record footage, and then they'd cut it into a trailer and be like, yeah, that works. You know, it's just really funny to me. But this is where it all started. I mean, this is where it all kicked off with BGS attempting their own version of Fallout, and it got people plenty excited. I mean, remember, this was when BGS was really up and coming. Honestly, they had almost like completely peaked. After this would take them to another level, and then they would have, of course, Skyrim 3 only 3 years after this. I mean, again, it's crazy because we used to get these games so frequently. And now games, of course, are much bigger, more detailed. There's more mechanics and stuff. Games are bigger now, so it takes longer. But it's crazy that they released this in 2008. Skyrim would come 3 years later. After this, you know, we eventually got the game, and they filmed a little documentary while they were making Fallout 3. And this is something I cherish. This documentary came on the DVD that came with the collector's edition. And so it was a really, really cool sort of, I mean, just like the Grounded documentaries or Raising Kratos or something, it gives you an insight into how they actually made the game and the decisions made. And usually they only release these things when the game goes well, right? If the game is not received super well, maybe it doesn't ever see the light of day, or it gets heavily delayed or canceled or whatever. But I'm very glad that we got these. I wish it was more common in AAA development to film these types of documentaries, because I think it would lead to a greater understanding and appreciation of the art. And I think it might even lead to people being a little bit more, not lenient, but understanding of the dev process. And I think people would be more flexible with like delays and stuff if they saw all of the headaches the devs have to go through and stuff. And so I thought we could check it out because it's a fascinating little interview or series of interviews. And Todd is young in it. Look at that guy. Also, do you see the thing on his desk? Little foreshadowing, huh? Isn't that fun? Isn't that fun? A cool little reveal. Also, look at the chunky keyboards. Oh, 2008. 2008, man. Yeah, it's a self-sculpture of Todd Howard, right? It's the little idol from the opening, Indiana Jones. That's the idol. And of course, now Todd is the executive producer on the Indiana Jones game from Machine Games. So he's been into Indiana Jones for a very, very long time. And so it's just kind of like a fun little Easter egg that, you know, at this point that was a solid 12, 13 years away from happening. But you can see, like, when he says he's a fan of Indiana Jones, he's not kidding. Like, back in 2008, he had this on his desk. You got to be a pretty big fan to have something on your desk of it. And so I guess pre-Loot Crate. Loot Crate just flooded everybody with so much stuff that everybody had knickknacks for every game franchise ever. But prior to that, this was a pretty good indication of being a fan. Yeah, so a fun little thing. You're right. We should light the almighty candle. We should. Admit it, Luke. You love Todd and BGS. So I think with all this, nobody's rooting for BGS to figure their crap out more than people like me, and I think a lot of my community, because we are largely former fans. You could even say we're still fans, but part of the reason that I'm so aggressive towards BGS and I don't really put up with a lot of their crap is because I've been burned by it, much like this holy Todd Howard candle. And I don't think coddling them makes anything better, frankly. I think being dishonest and saying that Starfield's actually really great, people just need to be easier on them, I don't think that helps BGS make better games. What will help BGS make better games and get back onto the top of where they used to be, the industry of adventure gaming, what will help them do that is serious introspection, reflection on their dev process. But that will only start and happen once the executives and leadership within BGS understands there's an issue. With Cyberpunk 2077, you could see they had a crisis. I mean, the whole studio, morale cratered. Everybody was like, did we just blow it? Did we just take ourselves from one of the most beloved studios in the world to one of the most hated in a matter of a month? Like, did that just happen? Yes, it did. And they realized they had to make changes. And so they dug themselves out. And look where they are now. I mean, now they've somehow managed to impress people so much with Phantom Liberty and all the improvements to Cyberpunk that people are way more stoked now for The Witcher 4 and what's coming next from them than they were just a few short years ago, because they've demonstrated they can make those improvements. With BGS, they could easily achieve the same end, but it will take some pretty substantial alterations and shifts in approach and design process. And whether they're willing to do that or not is what's still up in the air. And that's what's really heartbreaking, because like they could do it, but they seemingly just don't want to acknowledge any of the problems. And part of that, I would argue, is because there's still to this day a subset of the fan base that treats them like a toddler that just put a drawing together with crayons. And they're like, look, Daddy, I made a drawing of a Stegosaurus. And it's just like 2 lines. This makes me sound really mean. I swear I don't do this to my kids. But like, if they're a toddler and it's 2 lines and a bunch of scribbles, for a toddler, you're like, good job. That's good. I mean, you know, that doesn't look like a Stegosaurus, but it's a toddler. They did their best. So good job. You know what? It's not a great portrait of a Stegosaurus, but you did the best that you could as a toddler. And people treat BGS the same way, where they're like, well, you know, you wanted to make a space adventuring RPG, and it's really it's a pretty bad one, but you know what? You did your best. You did your best. Oh, toddler. Yeah. You know, like that doesn't help it. These are adults that are charging you full price for a video game. Okay. It's a business at the end of the day. Yes. It's also an art form, and being critical and self-reflective is a big part of creating art. And the fact that some of these guys just refuse to do that, I think is part of the reason you still see the games the way they are now. So, you know, the most hardcore detractors or hardcore critics are often some of the biggest fans, or at least they were. And for me, I was a huge BGS fan for many, many years. And then, especially specifically Fallout. And then I feel that they just steadily burned me from 2015 to today. And I don't think that pretending those problems are not existent helps anything. So that's a very long answer to the point of, Luke, just admit you love BGS. I do kind of love BGS. I want them to be successful. I want them to figure it out, which is why I don't cushion anything. Like, if I was not a fan, I would just be apathetic. I would just be like, oh, no, it's not very good. Anyway, moving on. But we talk about it because we care, because we want to see them improve. We want to see them get back on the horse and get back on the top of their game, because they made some incredible games when they were at the top. But now they just make such bafflingly stupid decisions so consistently. You're just left just amazed. The Vault Tech Files, Fallout 3.
We wanted to have more than one thing in our pocket. That we didn't just want to do an Elder Scrolls, then an Elder Scrolls, and an Elder Scrolls. We knew we wanted to be in a similar vein in terms of, we wanted open world, we wanted, you know, kind of role-playing elements and things like this. And we made a list of things that we might want to do. At the top of the list was Fallout.
Fallout 1 to me is like the pinnacle of the post-apocalyptic gameplay.
Emil.
And looking at the story and the characters in there were really inspiring.
We felt in that world and the systems they have in Fallout 1, coupled with the way we put things together, we sort of became obsessed. Like, this is the game. We have to make this game. a bunch of the people who run the company knew the people at Interplay, and we pestered them like, are you guys using Fallout? They weren't doing.
Yeah, and he would later say that was Robert Altman. So like the head honcho at ZeniMax and the guy that owned all of this, and it would eventually sell to Xbox. They were the ones working with like Interplay and those guys to try and get the rights. And it eventually happened. They eventually landed the rights because Fallout hadn't really exploded onto the mainstream stage. It was only Fallout 3 that did that, but it just took a little while to happen. And then as for the people here, I recognize him. It's too hard to tell with this. It's too low resolution. There's Emil, there's Todd. I don't recognize this guy either. But a lot of these guys are still at BGS. A lot of them are still there. Emil is notably like Todd's right-hand man, of course. They've been working together for decades. Emil's the guy that wrote like the like lyrics and music for like, not like, I don't think he wrote the actual melody or anything, but he wrote all the lyrics and stuff for Skyrim's main theme. He's like the brains behind the Dragonborn thing and all of the dragon script. Like he's a very creative guy and he's very good at that. I think he has some methodologies that I would say are woefully outdated, but then again, I don't make video games. He does, so I'd say he makes bad games. But moving on.
Do anything with it? Can we do something? And eventually they said yes.
It's now ours, and we
Pete!
have always taken the approach that Fallout.
Yeah, so Pete started as product manager. This is 2008. He would eventually get promoted to the point where he was head of marketing for like all of Bethesda Softworks. So he got promoted, and eventually climbed the ladder till he was at the very, very top. And he just recently retired. I think he retired last year, which is crazy.
3 is being made as if we made the first 2. Well, that means we do what we do, which is we reinvent, we look at what works, what didn't. We're not afraid to make changes. We're not afraid to try new things, and we're going to try and sort of move the
those
genre
late
forward and move
2000s PC
forward.
gaming cases.
Our game is set 30-some years after the events of Fallout 2, so we didn't want to step on their fiction, but the story itself is something that we came up with based on the themes of the original Fallout. It's 30 years after the events of Fallout 2, but it's 200 years after the original atomic holocaust. So in our game, things have actually gotten worse. You know, society hasn't progressed. You know, humanity is struggling to survive. There's radiation sickness and people don't have fresh, clean water, and like, people are pretty well screwed. You leave the safety of your vault into this world, you know, it's your big decision. Am I gonna help these people, or am I gonna, you know, do my own thing and serve my own selfish needs?
We felt we needed to do something new with role-playing and guns, that we couldn't just do a pure first-person shooter thing. So how can we kind of bridge that gap between what my character can do that I've made in the game and what I, the player, can do? Something I always wrestle with.
Our game is primarily first person. So when you have guns in first person, the bar has been raised. You know, you've got Halo 3, Call of Duty 4, you get to approach that level, but it's tough because we're an RPG, not a shooter. What we definitely wanted to do with the gun stuff is not do everything that everyone else has done. So, you know, we have some weapons that you can craft and some unique weapons, you know.
And I think in years past, this was all like, there was a lot more leniency with this. And, you know, for years and years and years, the tale was always that, well, BGS games are fun enough that it doesn't matter if like the shooting isn't great. It doesn't matter if the graphics aren't that great or if it's buggy. Like, the game is fun enough that it makes up for that. I don't think the tolerance is still there anymore. I think people expect more. And, you know, Emil brings up that, oh, well, you know, if we're going to add in shooting mechanics, we're going to be compared to Halo 3, we're going to be compared to Call of Duty 4. Like, we're going to be put into that category. And that is true. Like, but this is seemingly a lesson that they kind of forgot about, or they got too comfortable thinking that they could get away with not keeping up with the competition. Because this is something I also said with Starfield, where I was like, if you're going to go into it and do like space sim stuff where you can explore a galaxy, you're going to be compared to the peers that do that also and do it very, very well. I mean, he was bringing up the best shooters of the day. So if you're going to try a space sim, you're going to be compared to like No Man's Sky. You're going to be compared to Star Citizen, Elite Dangerous. Like, you're going to be compared to those. And you need to have comparable features and mechanics. Otherwise, people are just going to say how outdated and behind the curve you are. Back in 2008, I think they could get away with having shooting mechanics in Fallout 3 that were not as good as Call of Duty 4 or not as good as Halo 3, because people are like, oh, the rest of the game is fun enough. Now I don't think the tolerance is there.
Like the rocket launcher that shoots all the crap you find in the world, that can shoot it as projectiles. One of the things we realized is with Oblivion, most of the combat is melee combat. So everybody's, charging you in up close and personal. Not so with guns. People stay back, they take cover. We've really had to compensate for that.
What we're doing technically with Fallout 3, we're drawing twice as much stuff on the screen and faster, right? So our actual ability to put things on the screen and have them look cool or be cool or do more with characters, explosions, whatever we want, it's, a large factor above Oblivion. Our problem is we can't stop ourselves. Fallout's one of those examples of the game, when we started, was about half the size.
I look at the game overall, and
which is really funny, because you go back to Fallout 3 nowadays and compare it to other contemporary open world games, and it's big, but it's much closer to New Vegas than it is to like Skyrim. Skyrim is totally open, right? New Vegas and Fallout 3 are much more segmented. So there's chunks of the map that you kind of have to load into like downtown DC, and then you load into this other area. Like it's much more broken up, and then there's a lot more empty space between them. So they made a pretty significant improvement in how densely they pack things in, going from Fallout 3 to Skyrim. But I will say, like, Fallout 3 feels much closer to New Vegas than New Vegas feels to Skyrim. Which makes sense, because they're using the tools of Fallout 3 and a lot of the same materials and models and stuff, and work that they did for Fallout 3. They just copy and pasted it into New Vegas because they didn't have time to do anything else.
remarkably similar to, what we had envisioned. There are some really big plot points that changed for the better.
You emerge from these vaults, and you don't know what's happened. So it's the optimism of this retro 50s world, and it's all destroyed. That people are still getting on. They're still trying to do their hair right. And if they had hairspray, they'd use it. It's like, you know what? Don't look at the destroyed crater and the smoking thing behind me. It's all cool. We'll have some cigars and martinis later.
You just managed to get yourself into all sorts of trouble, don't you?
That's what I love about Fallout. It doesn't take itself too seriously because the reality is so frightening and so depressing. It feels like you leave that vault, and the only thing you take with you is this piece of technology strapped to your wrist that becomes your sort of lifeline. It's that immersion thing. It's keeping you in the game.
We're big believers in immersion because ultimately our goal is we want to see productivity decline. We want sick days to go up. We want people staying up until 5 o'clock in the morning because they had no idea what time it was, and they just had to do that one more quest, and they have to get up for work in an hour later.
And I can understand that. I just think like that obsession with immersion, though, has gotten lost a bit, because I think they were still able to largely achieve it in Fallout 4, and then Fallout 76 it kind of went out because it's an online game, and so there's a lot of stuff that you're doing that doesn't really make sense immersion wise. And then with Starfield, it also, immersion is pretty much out the door just because there's so many load screens constantly that it really breaks it up. I'm a firm believer that if Starfield had seamless traversal and travel, the user scores would go up by like a solid point to point or two. Like it's such a big deal in a game like Starfield. It is baffling that they didn't think of it as a major issue in the early design phase. Like, it's such an obvious problem that a dumbass like me was bringing it up after the first few trailers we got for Starfield. Like, really very, very readily apparent that this was going to be an issue. But they just apparently didn't think it was going to affect immersion that much, but it clearly did.
I think one of the things that we try to do really well are the worlds that are very, very realized. So for the moments you're in them, the amount of times you say, I wonder if I can, oh, I can. I wonder if I can, oh, I can. It gives you a level of attachment, to the person you're playing in the game.
Fallout is just such a unique, wonderful.
And I think Ashley is still there. I think Ashley is still one of the head honchos at PGS, production director. I like the big jar of caps and everything. Yeah, what is immersion? Immersion is just like when you're playing a game and you feel like you're actually in the world of the game. Or like what they were referring to is when you're truly immersed in something, You just want to keep going and exploring. You lose track of time. Like, you're just in it. You know, it's like when you're playing Red Dead Redemption 2 and you're just exploring and riding around, and you're in Saint Denis, and you stop by, you get a new suit, and then you walk in and you want to see a show. So you walk in and you see a show, and it's great. Then you hop back on your horse and you ride along the coast. And before you realize it, you've spent an hour and a half doing basically nothing, but you were just immersed in it and you just got lost. That's what they want. That's what they were aiming for. The devs at Bethesda and Obsidian at the time had such different viewpoint on the themes and ideas of Fallout. Massive difference when you look at both the documentaries of 3 and New Vegas. Well, exactly. So they did a documentary like this on Fallout New Vegas. And that is also very, very interesting. And it's going to be interesting to contrast and compare.
World to
I agree.
explore. I think it fits the kind of games we make perfectly. It's an open-ended environment, lots of characters, really interesting game systems.
If you can make whatever the repetitive action is really entertaining, like that's where the rubber meets the road in a lot of these games. So this is something I know the player's gonna do 1,000 times. Make that as entertaining as you can, and the rest of it is pretty much great.
And that's true. And this is one of the things where I've said, like, Todd has an understanding of what makes games really good, but he just, I don't know if he's gotten too busy, if he's gotten bored, or if they just aren't capable of doing anything else. But like, that is a very simple but profoundly powerful statement, that if you can find the thing the player's going to do 1,000 times and make it entertaining, like really entertaining, everything else will kind of click into place. And you can see that in like the original games. I remember playing Fallout 3 and New Vegas way back in the day, and the first time I realized like the gore system and how that worked, like it was just entertaining to see the bodies like explode when you would hit them with an anti-material rifle in New Vegas or something. And it was always like the cinematic camera was an entertaining thing. It was really cool. But the thing is, players aren't static. Things change and evolve, and players will expect more, and they need more to be entertained. So you can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And I think like Fallout 4, they were still able to do some things that were entertaining. Most people's problems were with like the role play and with the writing, but the core mechanics were pretty solid. With Starfield though, like, you ask about the minutia, like the combat isn't that entertaining. They got rid of like all of the gore from the Fallout games. Maybe it's because they wanted to differentiate it. Maybe it's because the engine couldn't handle it. Who knows? But they got rid of like all of the gore systems. And then they go, and traversing isn't very entertaining because you're just running forward. Like it's like that major point that he just brought up that was like a core piece of the design philosophy of Fallout 3 and eventually, you know, Skyrim and probably Fallout 4. It's like they just forgot about it. They just spaced it, you know?
We had the story written, and we had the outlines for all the quests, but then, you know, we have a lot of talented designers here. We wanted to pass that stuff on to them, so they would be given the rough outlines of these, you know, miscellaneous quests, and then they would have the freedom to flesh those out themselves.
Ah, welcome, weary traveler. You look like a traveler in need of relaxation and the finest of chemical assistance.
Design is an iterative process. You need to leave room to change as you go. So having a design doc that thick at the outset is actually not that healthy. I think we did a much better job this time around than we did in Oblivion. We had builds of the game, and we actually themed those builds according to the things we wanted to see in the game. So we had a combat build, a creature build.
We had a build that was just called Guns. And all the build was about was shooting guns. Like, how do they feel in your hand? And so there was no, it must do this, it must do this, it must do this. It's just about guns. And that kind of will get us on a path of something that is just a lot more fun.
And I think this works when you have a small team. But what they're describing is like the main process of video game design that you'll learn in any sort of art school or school that teaches you game design is like, well, you create the design document. It doesn't have to be fully fleshed out, but you got to have a pretty core idea of what the game is going to look like so you can assign everybody to it, start working on stuff. But like when you break it up and it's like, oh, we're just going to kind of stumble our way and try to like see where we end up with the game. You can't do that with 300, 400, 500 people. It just doesn't work, as we've seen. We even saw that with Cyberpunk 2077, as they talked about in that GDC interview we talked about last week. So it just doesn't, it doesn't translate. It works when you have like 80 people working on a game, which Fallout 3 was made. I think Skyrim, they had 110-ish people working on Skyrim. And so prior to this, they probably had like 80 to 90 working on Fallout 3. And with that, yeah, you go to the office, you know everybody in the office. You can like all sit down and kind of meet up together and get on the same page with stuff. You can't do that when you have hundreds and hundreds of stuff, or hundreds and hundreds of people. Isn't that the same Emil who said we didn't use design documents for Starfield because it constantly would need to be updated? He said something akin to that. Yeah, it's, my screen went black again. This is driving me crazy. Yeah, it's, I know some people were like, they said that that wasn't totally what he said. It was slightly out of context. I think what he was trying to say was more nuanced. He was saying it was about efficiency, but part of the problem with Starfield is that it feels like it's a game made by a bunch of people who didn't know what game they were making. And so it's just kind of a collection of a bunch of different things that don't fit super well together. And that's exactly what a design document's for. And they apparently didn't want to do that.
We can sit in a meeting for hours and debate, the pluses and minuses of it. And then we'll put it in the game, and in 30 seconds, anybody watching this would go, this is terrible. Or, great. And you don't have to, sometimes you just overthink it. So we try to force ourselves more to put it in the game and play with it as soon as possible. And you just know instantly.
There have certainly been first-person RPGs that have had guns before, but I think it's been a while since PC players have had a game like that. On the console side, I think people have been wanting something like that for a long time, Give me a game that has the gunplay of Gears of War or Call of Duty with the depth of an open-world RPG.
And it's just really funny to hear them say Fallout 3 and then like the gameplay and gunplay of Call of Duty. You're like, we playing the same game, dude?
I hope that eventually, someday, maybe many years from now, that we are just as well known for Fallout as the Elder Scrolls, because right now they are both our children.
It is so different. It's this weird, like, Tomorrowland gone awry. And that in itself is gold for someone like me to come in and try to, help create that world. So it's pure escapist entertainment. It's crazy. And you try not to get wrapped up on the seriousness of it.
And I think that that's something the Fallout TV show did really well, is that they did get wrapped up in the seriousness of it, but they were able to look at it through a lens of a character that's trying to maintain her optimism while navigating this wretched place. But she still gets her hands literally quite dirty. And I think that that's reflected a lot in the stories that are presented in like Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 compared to the stories put forward in like Fallout New Vegas, for example, which is just a kind of reversal of that. Yeah, Zeke's, either you update a doc or you constantly have calls and meetings so everyone can get back on the same page, since teams can be independent. It's an endless battle in my experience in development. Well, yeah, and we saw in that GDC talk with the CDPR game director that ran the teams for Phantom Liberty. And after Cyberpunk 2077, they were like, okay, so something's not working. The fact that this happened, something went very, very wrong. And what they found was just that there was inefficiency constantly. When you have the set designers and the level designers that are building out, like the example he gave was a bar. They designed the bar scene and then they pass it forward to the cinematics team. And the cinematics team is like, well, this doesn't work because all of the stools are too close in. We need some of them pulled out because we have to stage the scene around that. And we need these lights here because the lighting team's going to need that. So they send it back and then it gets reworked a little bit. Then they send it back forward. The cinematics team does their thing. They pass it forward to lighting. And then the lighting team is like, actually, this doesn't work. We need to go and add lights here and here because the lighting arrangement isn't quite right. So they pass it all the way back to the beginning, and then they add lights and models back in. And it's just super, super inefficient. It works to do it that way and have each department doing their own thing when you have like 50 people or 100 people. And you can just physically get up, walk over to Dave's desk and say, hey, when you guys light this scene, what are you going to need? Can you come over to my desk and tell me where you're going to need lights? And he just comes over and does that. He's like, yeah, here, here, and here, put this fluorescent light there. I think if we had a big red light here, that would be cool too. Okay, cool. We'll do that and we'll pass it to you. You'll get it in like a few days, but that helps me. When you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people, it doesn't work anymore. So what CDPR did is they broke it up into individual little strike teams. So there would be a team with a lighting designer, there'd be a team with a level designer and a gameplay designer and cinematic guy, and they would go in and they would handle the bar scene together, all working at the same time. And it allowed them to work way faster and way more efficiently. And I think that that's the better way of doing it compared to this kind of old school approach. And it seems like after I talked to some people who have worked at BGS and currently work there, at least as of the time I talked to them, it seems like that kind of encapsulates everything with BGS, is that they have an old school way of doing things, but they haven't evolved since like 2008, 2010, 2011. They're doing things fundamentally the same way that they've always done it. even though they are 5 to 6 times the size they were back then. And they're building games that are way bigger. And that it shows, I think, in the end product, unfortunately. Zeeks, I worked in an indie studio. Most days we were in voice chat while we worked, so acceptance criteria was just a moment away from getting cleared up without writing it down. Well, and that kind of flexibility, I think, works if everybody can talk and get on the same page. That's why this could work, again, if you have like 80 people in the studio, because you physically get up and go ask the guy, or in this case, on a Discord call or whatever. You can just hop on voice chat, ask the question, get the clarity you need, and then you can do your thing, and boom, easy. But when it's all segmented into dozens of people and teams, and then it passes to them and everything gets passed back, like, it just makes games take way longer to make. And at the end of the day, you probably end up with some corners just getting cut where it's like, okay, well, we have to finish this scene. So the lighting team just says, screw it, we'll just work with the lights we have in the scene now. And so they go and they light the scene, and it looks kind of weird, but it just is what it is. And it lowers the quality because it's just, at some point you have to say enough is enough. Yeah. Anyway, but we've talked about it a lot before. I think it's just, there's a lot of old school ways that they do things that worked back then that don't work now.
Moments where you think about it and you wonder if you're being irresponsible. The good news is the people the game is for get it, but sometimes you talk to people, I'm the worst person at a cocktail party. I mean, you go and they say, oh, what do you do? It's like, I make video games. What kind? The kind where you shoot people? Yeah, kind of. Are they really violent? Like, where's it set? In DC? Oh, that's cute. Yeah, it's all blown up. And then they just turn around. They don't want to talk to you anymore. Like, that guy's sick.
It's the signature of a Bethesda game studio game is you're gonna have a big open-ended world. You're gonna be able to walk anywhere you want. If you see something in the distance, you're gonna be able to walk to it, and you're gonna be able to open it up, and you're gonna find lots of cool stuff there.
We've gotten better with our animation stuff, is leagues above what it was in Oblivion. Our portrayal of characters as realistic people, I think, have gone above and beyond.
It's a big world out there, honey, full of all sorts of people. What about you? What sort of person are you going to be? It's very, very interesting that there's a group of people who have hope for what's left of humanity. It's a very compelling story of the young hero. Heroine has to go through a series of tests, both ethical and moral as well as physical, and I think it's very, very good.
Despite the...
They also used to do this. They had, who is it? Patrick Stewart in Oblivion, and then they have Liam Neeson in Fallout 3, and then they stopped doing that. But like, they had big name celebrities in their games for a while, and then they just kind of stopped. Even New Vegas had what's his name playing Benny? Matthew Perry. Yeah. Matthew Perry played Benny because he was a huge fan of Fallout and a big video gamer. So like, they used to do it where they put like big celebrities into it, and then they just kind of stopped. I don't know if it's like a budgetary thing, or if it's like if it's maybe they just didn't like having to like worry about it too much. I don't know, but they used to do it all the time, and then they just stopped. 100% budget. Well, you would think that now, if ever they could afford more celebrities to be in their games, it would be today, when budgets are like hundreds of millions of dollars. But maybe actors started demanding more. Maybe actors were like, actually, video games make a ton of money. Yeah, you're going to pay me more. And maybe that's where the line got drawn.
Destruction, and despite like how depressing some of the scenes may be, they're a pure charm. And some of those are like violence done in ridiculous manner. And some of those are a line somebody says.
Moriarty pisses in his still. Crazy bastard thinks it's hilarious.
There are very few ideas that you can't put into a Fallout game. Something else that's more serious fantasy, you'd say, wrong flavor. But here, you can have a robot that goes around asking for friends and cutting their heads off, or, anything you want to do. Being private and publishing our own stuff lets us take risks that a lot of people can't. We're in a pretty fortunate position of having the time and the creative freedom to do games like this. We sort of feel like we like it a lot, and if we execute it well, it'll find an audience that it makes us enough money to do the next game.
You have a smaller group of people, they tend to cling to each other a little more tightly. We tend to believe in each other.
Yeah, like, look at that. That's like the whole studio. It's like they could do these roundups. In the making of Skyrim documentary they did, they also do scenes like in a space just like this, where Todd's up at the front and they have everybody there. And now, I mean, I don't think that they could they could possibly do that. It's pretty crazy. But the teams are huge. The teams are massive now.
More, sort of the idea that it's us against the world. No other help is coming. If we're going to get it done, it's going to be the folks here. And when I started in '99, it was a little group of folks. The development team was 10, 12 guys. It was Todd and his small little band working away on Morrowind then. Even though we've grown and gotten a lot bigger, I don't think we've lost that feeling. I think that there are enough of us from those days, and just about everybody from that first team is still here.
Someone was playing and did the Megaton quest, and it was priceless. He just hit the switch, and you see the mushroom cloud in the background. He just sort of sat back in his chair, and with this big smile on his face. And then he checked his Pip-Boy to check his karma. It said evil. I said, yep, that'll do it.
That's a pretty big element in the game. When you do something evil, we've tried to make it very visually entertaining, and then the game tells you, you've lost karma, you're a bad person. That was a lot of the reason we wanted to make it. That it was, oh, this is just so cool. And the pushback that I would get, that's like 10 years old. I'm like, cool is cool forever, man. This is gonna be cool 50 years from now.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see the old school like design decisions and stuff that happened, and like they talk about going to DC and taking all the reference photos and the process of all of that. This was also kind of funny where they're working on the game and then they have a thunderstorm come through and they lose power.
And that, a lot of it is just kind of, guessing, okay, whoops. That was a big one.
This morning, a major storm swept through the area.
Look at this.
4 separate reports of tornadoes across the region.
Get back to that machine.
You don't need computers, draw it up. Where are you going?
Build the triangles and frame rate. We had some electric storms pass through and basically down power lines, trees went down. It was pretty insane. We lost power for a good, I would say about 8 to 10 hours. It happened around 3 o'clock yesterday. It's a little weird because usually, when it rains around here, we do lose power for like a brief 2-3 minutes. So, it was kind of like business as usual, but then the power never came back. At this point, I don't see a lot of changes affecting like, data sets.
It's a little funny designing Fallout 3 in the pitch black because all the power's out, which is just kind of funny. This is like the point where I fell in love with BGS back in the day, that Skyrim, and then, the lead up to Fallout 4. They were at the top. They were at the top because they were just doing their own thing. And it was like, yeah, there are ways maybe we should do game design. We should be doing things, but we have our own unique way of doing it and it works really well. And then it's just over the last handful of years, it's just been really sad to see it slowly kind of collapse as things aren't working. They just double down on it more and more and more, which is mildly infuriating because you're like, I know you're capable of a lot more than this. At least you were. Also, you ever wonder what the sound of the ants in Fallout is?
And that's about it. This is an ordinary wrapper from like a snack pack kind of cereal, and Captain Crunch or Cheerios or what have you. And this is the sound of the giant ants in the wasteland. A lot of the sound they make when their feelers are out or when they're moving around, looking for something, I don't know, kind of squeaky, a little plasticky sounding. And I'm basically just taking this thing and then scrunching it all together, and it makes all these little squeaks and rips and tears and stuff like that. So it's a lot of that mixed with other pieces of plastic and clear wrap and liquids and things like that for the ants.
Isn't that kind of fun? Who knew, right? Who knew? I love Foley stuff. Literally hearing how they make all of the sounds for games and stuff is always fascinating. Yeah, it's just, the whole thing is crazy. I do honestly hope that they figure it out and that they get back on top, because can you imagine like a Fallout redemption arc or a BGS redemption arc where like they come back and they're making Phantom Liberty grade games? Like, gee whiz, man, that would be amazing. Do I think that's gonna happen? At this point, the fact that they refuse to acknowledge any of the shortcomings, I'm less convinced that it could actually happen, but I guess time will tell. Time will tell. Yeah, Dark Spider, exactly. It's crazy. It's crazy. Dude, Fallout Redemption would go so hard. Oh! So great. Be so great. I'd lose it, man. I would find it and then I would lose it.
He took my thing.